Well, welcome again to In Deep. It's my chance to just dig in a little bit deeper in some of the concepts that are found in the scriptures and also in life and the things that were impacted in our world. Chance to just go beneath the surface and talk about some things that I think are really important for people living in our generation and trying to follow the Lord. Now, today I want to talk about the basic idea that's found in the book, The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is one of probably the best writer that Christianity produced in the 20th century, and some of his stuff that he wrote is so prophetic about the modern moment in which we're living that I think sometimes it's worth us going back over these things so that we can understand the moment that we're currently living in. Now, C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Abolition of Man, which is a very difficult book to read, and unless you're quite patient, I don't recommend just sort of having a try at it. If you're going to have a read of The Abolition of Man, make sure you've got your time to be able to take some time to consider it as you go along and not get too frustrated if you feel confused, but it's worth the effort. Now, one of the basic ideas in this book is that C.S. Lewis, who was a professor of mythology at Oxford University and ancient languages, and his basic idea was his sort of frustration that the ancient people, when people who would write about ancient people in his time and in our time, it is the same, they would say that people from the ancient past were very superstitious and practiced things that you might call magic, in which we kind of have this idea that people from long ago believed that they could concoct spells or do methods or have special things, items, or all kinds of things that could possibly manipulate the natural world around them so that they could, have extra powers or abilities. And that's kind of our way of thinking about those people from the ancient past. But the truth is, C.S. Lewis, who was an expert in that area, said that people from the ancient past didn't think about the world in that way, and they didn't practice magic in the way that we think that they did. Now, that was kind of surprising, because if you kind of read any kind of book that's set in a sort of a mythological past, all of the people seem to have access to some sort of powers or spells or artifacts that gave them significant powers over other things. Now, that's not true. What actually is true is people from the ancient world looked to see what kind of way things were. They kind of studied the natural world to try to figure out the way that things operated, and then they would try to comply with them. Rather than change them, they would try to comply with them. For example, they would try to figure out the way that the seasons worked, or the way that agriculture worked, or the way that they perceived the gods or goddesses worked, so that they could kind of go along with the process. Rather than rebel against it or try to change it, they would go with it. Now, C.S. Lewis wants to say that that is the opposite of the way that we are today. We don't look at the natural order of the world and try to go along with it. We try to change it. We try to modify it. We try to customize it. And so our ideas then, cast on the ancients, make them people who practice magic. The truth is, we practice that kind of, call it natural order magic, that you might call science, to try to manipulate the natural world in order that we can get what we want. Now, just to go back, let's talk about two cultural ideas or three cultural ideas that are well embedded in the ancient teachings of ancient civilizations. One of them is the idea, which you'll find mostly in Chinese or Asian studies, which is the idea of the Tao or the Tao. Now, the Tao or the Tao, and that's just sort of a different way of, Tao is a more modern way of saying Tao, means the way, the path, the road, or the route. So people who understand the Tao would try to find that ancient or that perfect path, way, route, path. And so Tao is the natural order of the universe whose character one's human intuition must discern in order to realize the potential for individual wisdom. So somebody like Confucius is somebody who they elevated to this place of being, super duper wise. He had this individual wisdom that really discerned the order of the universe and then told people how they ought to live. So in Confucianism, there's a lot of people finding their place on that ordered ladder. So you've got the sun, and then you've got, the heavens and the sun, and then you've got the king, and then you've got the nobles, and then you've got the local magistrates, and it kind of goes down, and then least of all is the women and the children and the dogs and the pigs, and it all kind of has this hierarchy, but everybody had their place, and if you want to live according to the wisdom of heaven, then you have to live according to the place that you were placed in. But they had it for not just that, but for thousands of different things. And so you can probably easily understand that. Well, that's not very dissimilar from what is found in ancient Indian culture, and probably current practice in Indian culture, is the idea of the Dharma. Now, the Dharma is it's hard to translate into English, but it basically means what is established or firm, kind of like the law of the universe. In Hinduism, Dharma signifies behavior that is considered to be in accordance with the Artha, which is the order that makes life and the universe possible. So it includes the duties, the rights, the conduct, the virtues, the right way of living. In Buddha, Dharma means the cosmic law and order. There is some significant differences between Hinduism and Buddhism, but that's not our conversation right now. Just to know that the people who teach from that perspective recognize that there is a Dharma, a way that they call the universe's order, and it is established and it's firm, and it is, if you can find that and you can live according to it, then you are doing the right way of living. You are following the right way. Rather than rebel, you go with it. Now, for us, Christianity, the most ancient roots of Christianity is found in Judaism, which is the teaching and the instruction that's given through the people of Israel, and found most significantly in the teaching of Moses. Now, in the Jewish tradition, it's not called Tao and it's not called Dharma. It's called the Torah, which means instruction, teaching, or the law. Listen to this verse in Psalm chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. He says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel or the thinking or the logic or the reasoning of the wicked, nor stands in the way, nor sits in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season. Its leaf does not wither." Now, here is sort of the human promise of living according to the law, is that in all that he does, he prospers. In order that if you meditate on this law of the Lord, the rule of the Lord, the way of the Lord, if you can understand it and you can live according to it, then you will prosper in all that you do. So in the same way as people who thought of the Tao or the Dharma, the Jewish people thinking of the Torah are really thinking in the same idea. God has established an order, and we need to understand that and then submit to it. Listen to some other things that he says about living according to the law of God. He says in Psalm 119, verses 1 to 3, "Blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord. Blessed are those who keep his testimonies, who seek him with their whole heart, who also do no wrong, but walk in his ways." So the law is not just a rule book for kind of living according to a religious standard. The law is a revelation about the way that life works. And if you live according to that law, like for example, let's just take an easy one. Thou shalt not commit adultery. There's nobody that's sensible, let's just say, that thinks that adultery is a beneficial element of the community. In fact, almost all communities have regulations against adultery, meaning that they don't promote it. Now, of course, nowadays, there are a lot of people who think, well, there is no wisdom in that, and my own sexual expression in the way that I want is the right way to live. Now, what the law of the Lord says, if you do that, you will not prosper. You will be broken by it because you're living against the law of God, the way of God. You're also living against the way that God has made the whole universe to be. So Psalm 19, verses 9 and 10 says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, It revives the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. So he's saying, this is the order, live according to it, and you will have that pure, beautiful way. So the attitude of the people who approached that then was the one of praying to God, you have a way, so please show me that way. Please teach me that way. So Psalm 25 verses 45 says, Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all day long. Psalm 86 verse 11, teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. So these people, recognizing, maybe you can hear it in the scriptures, these people recognize that there is a way, but we don't always understand the way. Like it's not obvious to us all of the time. And the reason that it's not obvious is because our hearts become very confused about what is right and what is wrong. And so what he's saying in the Psalms is, God, you have to inform me about what you are saying about life and about the rule and the way that I should live, and so that I can become wise. But also, you have to unite my heart. You have to pull all the parts of me together. So not only does my intelligence recognize it as right, but my emotions recognize it as right as well, so that I can walk according to it. Because we all know there's lots of times that we think they're the right thing to do, but we feel something different, and we're distorted in between them. So the world then that God has made operates according to his ways. There's no deviations from it. If you ever break those ways, it will always end up bad for you. If we rebel against the law of God, the way of God, the Tao, the Tao, the Dharma, the Torah, if we rebel against that, we are the ones who suffer for it. We don't overthrow the system. Now, the warning in the Abolition of Man, then, this book, is that modern mankind wants his own way and will use science to circumvent the natural order. So he calls it man's conquest of nature. And we kind of think about that in many ways. If, for example, you probably live in a house, and if you live in a house, it's kind of like you've created this place where the elements of nature no longer affect your life. You've got a roof over your head, so you're not getting wet. You've got walls to protect you from wind and from the elements and from heat and cold, and you've covered yourself up so that the elements of nature no longer affect your sort of day-to-day living. Now, that's just one small way of many ways that mankind is looking to kind of circumvent the law of nature so that they can get what they want. Now, he says that this is the byproduct of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment puts mankind at the center. So I don't know if you know much about world history, but we're living in a time, the modern age is the age that began with the Enlightenment. We're talking about, 500 years ago, that the way that people thought about themselves and about themselves in the world drastically changed. And it was partly because of science, but also science is the after effect of the Enlightenment. And one of the great sort of sayings that come out of that time is René Descartes, he says, I think, therefore I am, meaning that rational truth comes from my own perspective. I think it, and it's therefore true to me because that's how I know who I am, is that my center of reasoning is the viewpoint by which I understand everything else. So hundreds of years later, what that means is that people's perspective on truth is what matters. It's not whether it actually is objectively true, it's whether I think it's true. Also, it means that my perspective on what life's all about is true from my perspective. It doesn't matter if it's objectively true and can be submit to analysis to see if it's true. Everybody's living by their own perspective on what is the way. Even Christian religious people today think about, how do I utilize God? How do I utilize my religion? How do I utilize the things that I'm being taught about faith to create a world in which that I prefer, a life that I would like to have? And in fact, we end up kind of using God to give us the life that we want to live, rather than say, God, here is my life that you've given me. Tell me how you want this life to be used. It's the other way around. Now, that's a very dangerous thing. I want to just give you a few examples of the way that this currently happens. For thousands of years, we were all subject to the patterns of fertility that affect everybody, that sexual intercourse brings about children. And when it doesn't, there's nothing that can be done about that. But since the work of science in fertility, we now have birth control. And because now we can control the sort of side effects from sexual pleasure, that we now are kind of in control of choosing when and how that we have children. But C.S. Lewis wants to say that if you have the power to choose who is born, then you have power over the next generation as well. Your choices on what you want in life are affecting the outcome. Now, of course, you can spread that from all the way to IVF and people having children that way, all the way also to the other end of abortion and choosing not to let a child go to development. Now, those things are the way that science is controlling essentially who lives, and we're the ones using science in that way. Now, is that right to do? Agricultural science. We're no longer subject to the weather and doing the right things, but because of science, we can add in all kinds of different chemicals to the process. We can add in all kinds of elements. We can add all kinds of irrigation, and we can, in a sense, manipulate how things grow. Is that the right thing to do? What about fossil fuels? Well, fossil fuels have given us the ability to access power that's stored in the earth to burn, to use for our own pleasures. We would never be able to fly without fossil fuels. There's got to be something to burn because human beings don't have enough power to fly themselves, but we utilize all of the stored up power in the earth for our own benefit, even if it's no good at all. People no longer think about walking somewhere or traveling by foot. Especially if it's longer distances, we now use the power that we have available to go wherever we want, whenever we want, obviously outside of COVID, to, in a sense, have what experiences and go to the places that we want to be at. Here's another one, medical science. We're no longer subject to the same things about our physical illnesses, even our physical longevity is affected by our ability to control the things that are happening medically to us, and we can add in all kinds of either surgical operations or all kinds of medicines that alter the way that our bodies perform. In fact, many people feel like death is kind of a failure of the medical system, rather than the course of life of human maturing and then decay as being a natural process that we ultimately submit to. What about philosophy? Well, philosophy has given us the supposed power to no longer do things that are reasonable, because as long as we can make a philosophical argument about those things, we can say that those things are right. So people argue hugely about all kinds of things in humanity, and some of them make absolutely no real sense at all, but because you create the argument, you create the reason for it to be okay. It's not necessarily true. Proverbs gives us this warning. He says in Proverbs chapter 16, verses 1 to 3, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. And all the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. So commit to your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. He's saying there's a very strong difference between what I plan and what God chooses. And he's not saying, hey, you can make your own plans and go and do your own thing, live according to your own principles, and you'll get away with it. He's actually saying, when you do that, the will of the Lord, even about that, is done. So you have the plan, the Lord has the answer. And then he summarizes it in Proverbs 69. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Essentially, the book of Proverbs, a book on wisdom, is not a book about making you wise so that you can know the right thing to do all of the time so that you can ultimately get the happy life you want to. No, the book of Proverbs says a wise person is somebody who lives according to the Lord's ways, because those are the ways that are established. Your ways won't be established. So we have to submit to God's ways in order to be able to live the blessed life. Now, in John chapter 14, Jesus uses this word, the way, in a very new way. It's not entirely new, because if you're a person from that ancient time, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, that people from the Eastern world, that's China and India, and from the Western world and from the Middle East, they all had this way of thinking about the way as not being like a path that I might drive my car around, but the way is the way to go, the way to live, the way to be, the way. Now, Jesus in this context talks about the where he's going to, and Thomas says to him, we don't know the way, how are we supposed to get there? Now, Jesus then says this in John chapter 14, verses 6 to 7, and please don't try to listen like a modern listen. Try to listen to it like somebody who understood Dharma, somebody who understood Tao, somebody who understood Torah. And this is what Jesus says. Jesus says to them, I am the Tao. I am the Dharma. I am the Torah. I am the way of God. I am the way of life. He's not talking just about, sort of weirdly standing behind him and walking in his literal steps. He's talking about how he is the living principle of God, the living rule of God. He says, I am the way and I am the truth. Those are not separate ideas. They're the same idea. The truth is the way. He's not talking about as I'm winning an argument version of truth. He's talking about I am the true way. And he says, I am the life. So I am the one that has the life of God in him. So I am the Dharma, I am the Tao, I am the Tao. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He says, nobody comes to the Father except through me. Because if you had known me, you would know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And then he starts teaching the disciples about the coming of the Holy Spirit and how we will have Christ himself, the way, the Dharma, the Tao, the Torah. We would have the way of God living in us. So this is what Jesus is saying. If you're searching for this wisdom, like the Confucian scholars have, the Buddhist scholars, the Hindu scholars, the Jewish scholars, they're all looking for these things. Jesus says, I am all of those things. If you receive me, you receive inside of yourself the way. Which is kind of what he's saying here in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, that Jesus, it says, in the beginning was the Word. That's Jesus. That's the logic of God. That's the reasonableness of God, the truth of God. And the Word was with God. So all of that perfect truth, perfect understanding, perfect Tao was with God, and the Word was God. So it's an expression, it's part of who God is. Now, he was with God in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life, and the light was and the life was the light of men. So he kind of puts things in the right order. Jesus is before everything. When everything is made by him and through him and to him. So he is the central element in everything that exists. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. He is the Tao. He's the Dharma. He personally is that. And if we want in him, in that way, is all of his life. And in order to have light in our lives or illumination in our lives, we simply need to have Christ, the light, in us. It's Christ in us that is the wisdom of God, so that we know what way to go. So, in Hinduism, the Dharma, like I said at the beginning, the Dharma signifies behaviors that are considered to be in accord with what they call the Rita, the order that makes life and the universe possible. What Jesus is saying to all humanity, who's using lots of words to describe him, he's saying, I am the living version. I am the Rita. I am that. And if you have if you have me in you, then the way of the universe, the way of life is made known to you. So in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says, you need to come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I'm going to give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, because I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Imagine if you could have a chance to follow the one who is the way himself. He never deviates from the path of life, never falls into falsehood, never does anything that causes the pain of working against the order of God. And Jesus says, just come and follow me. So not only does he live within us, but he then also instructs us so that we can become disciples of him and learn to live according to the way of life that is in Christ Jesus. I'm finishing off with this idea that if we have Christ in us, then we will be drawn and led into the perfect path. And we need to ask ourselves, are our lives that are choosing ourselves to submit to the way of God? Or are we living in a kind of quasi-rebellion where we are trying to get our way done, our preferences, our choices, and then we are trying to manipulate the world around about us? Maybe we manipulate the people, maybe we rebel against the system, maybe we try to, say, get a lot of money so that we can control the situation, or get a lot of power so we can manipulate a situation. Or are we, like Jesus, gentle and lowly and simply conforming to the way of God and the things that God is bringing about in our lives that are good for us and we could submit to? So that's my hope, that today that you'll see that Christ is the life. He is the way. He is the truth. And have him live within you so that you can learn to live according to the way. And that will make even living through difficult things amazingly good, because you'll be drawing on the wisdom of God to lead you into the fullness of truth as you do. So God bless you, and we'll hope to see you next time on the next In Deep.